Our next speaker is Chris Sharp. Chris has been a firefighter with the Ventura County Fire Department for 20 years. He is currently assigned to Fire Station 35 in Newberry Park. He's been married to his wife, Amy, for 21 years, and they have 2 children. Kyle is a senior at Oaks Christian, and Emily is an 8th grader at Los Cerritos Middle School. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, everybody. This is crazy. John asked me to come speak tonight because I have a pretty crazy story to tell you. So the story I'm going to tell you tonight, nobody's heard before. So this is the first time that I've told the story. All right. So I've told bits and pieces to family and friends, but nobody's heard the story that I'm going to tell you, so I'm going to consider all of you family and friends tonight. So I've spent most of my career in Thousand Oaks. I've been a firefighter for 20 years. I've worked at different stations. I'm currently assigned to Fire Station 35 in Newberry Park. And the story I'm going to tell you is the story of the firefighters of Truck 35 on the night of the 7th and the days that followed. All right. So my story begins with a hug and a kiss, and it ends with a hug and a kiss. On November 7th, I was actually off duty, and I was at one of my kids' sporting events, and I got a phone call that said, hey, somebody had to go home sick. You mind coming in to finish the shift? So I'm like, sure, no problem. So I grabbed my gear, and I gave my wife and kids a hug and a kiss, and I said goodbye. And I said, I'll be home in the morning. I got to the station, and I was literally there maybe an hour, and the bell goes off. We got dispatched to Borderline. So the crew, we all jumped in the rig and took off. And en route to the call, the dispatchers were updating us that it was multiple victims shot, and the shooter was unknown where the shooter was. We got on the 101 freeway, and we got off at Moore Park Road, and as we're coming down the off-ramp, it was chaos. There was people running up the off-ramp, there was cars driving up the off-ramp, there was cars driving down the off-ramp, there was people running. You didn't know who the shooter was, if any of the people running was the shooter. It was mayhem. I was driving Truck 35 that night, and for those of you who don't know, the truck is the giant ladder truck that has a driver in the front and a driver in the back that cruises around town. So as we're coming off the freeway, I had my tillerman pitch out the rear end to block the cars from coming down. We stopped the rig. At that point, Engine 30 and Rescue 443 were already at the base of the off-ramp, along with our battalion chief. We got out of the rig, got our bulletproof vests on, and we're going to do a face-to-face to come up with a plan to see what our next steps were going to be. As we got out of the rig, a sheriff's car comes racing down the street right at us from Borderline. I felt like he was going to hit us. He was doing 100 miles an hour. He locks up his brakes right at us, and he jumps out and says, I got somebody in the back. We opened the door, and Sergeant Helis was in the back. Our crew, Engine 30's crew, and the rescue pulled the sergeant out of the car, and in the middle of Moore Park Road, we do what we do. We tried to save his life. At that point, the decision was made to have Engine 30's crew get in the ambulance and take Ron to the hospital. So we loaded him up, and Engine 30 and the ambulance took off. So that left us and the battalion chief at the base of the off-ramp. At that point, my captain and the chiefs decided that we needed to push forward and get to the opening of Borderline. So my captain jumped in the Suburban, the chief Suburban, and they took off to meet up with the officers in the front. And we were given the order to get the truck as close as possible to Borderline. And there was literally more police cars than I've ever seen in my life in that intersection, blocking the road. So myself and my two firefighters, we jumped in the rig and we were able to get the truck up to the gas station at Borderline. Once we parked, my captain got us on the radio and said, "Hey, you guys are going to be the first rescue task force in the building." So for those of you who don't know what a rescue task force is, it's a 2 or 3 firefighters in a group surrounded by officers with guns. And we work as a team. We work as one, and we move to where we need to go. So we grabbed our gear and we made it up to the parking lot in front of Borderline, and we met up with the officers that we were going to go in with. We came up with a plan and we headed for the front door. And we stepped inside. And I'm not sure that I can describe to you what it was like. But our job was to look for life, to save people. So that's what we tried to do. And we laid our hands on every one of the fallen inside. We touched every person inside there. Sorry. So, because they didn't want a bunch of firefighters tromping through the scene, the 3 of us that were inside that night had to handle all the duties that had to happen inside there. So it's crazy the things that you remember, but I just remember walking in and it was very smoky and there was a Laker game on the TV right there, you know, and it was just so surreal for what we were looking at. And all the windows in the back were blown out, and all the windows in the front were blown out. And we looked for life and didn't find any. So other things that had to happen is because the windows were blown out, we have a special camera that looks for heat. And we used that camera. The 3 of us had to go around the back of the building and search the brush for any victims that might have been still out there. And we didn't find any. Once we left there, once we were done inside and they decided that our job was finished, we walked out the front door, and outside in the parking lot was a group of people that were family, that were inside there that night, that were looking for their friends. And to get back to our truck, we had to walk through that group. And every one of them was looking at us for any kind of sign of hope. And it was one of the hardest things we had to do that night, was to walk through that group of people, because we didn't have any hope to give them. So we made it back to our truck, and we were clear from the scene. And at this point, it's probably 5:30 in the morning. And all we wanted to do was to get back to our fire station. Because to firefighters, our fire station is our safe place. It's our safe haven. It's where we can lock the doors and don't have to deal with the stuff that we have to deal with. So we got back to the fire station and we locked the doors and we were all together. And there was times when it was quiet, and there was times when we talked, and there was times when we cried. And believe it or not, there's times when we laughed, because if we didn't, we would lose our sanity. And 3 hours later, the bell goes off again. And to be a firefighter and to be a police officer, you have to be able to block out your emotions. You have to be able to take what we just did and put it away in your mind somewhere so that you can do your job. Because when the bell goes off, somebody needs our help, and we have to be able to think clearly and act decisively. And if we let emotion get into it, you wouldn't last a shift. So the bell went off. And I don't know if the fires were a blessing or a curse. It was a blessing because as soon as that bell went off, you block out everything that we just saw and did, and you hide it in your mind somewhere. And it's a curse for the exact same reason. We block it out and hide it in our mind somewhere to come out at a later time. When I go to work, we see the best and the worst that society has to offer on a daily basis. And it's those times that we have to think clearly and perform, because my life depends on it and your life depends on me performing. So most people don't know there was a fire prior to the Hill Fire in Wildwood Park that day. And it was probably 10 o'clock. And we fought the fire just like we fight every other brush fire. And we're rolling up the hose, and we're putting the rig, we're getting ready to leave, and we look across the canyon, and the first puff of smoke from the Hill Fire lifts up. And from that point on, it's a blur. The fire raced into Newberry Park, and all we could do was jump house to house, neighborhood to neighborhood, and save what we could and who we could. At the same time, the Woolsey Fire starts, and it's pushing into Thousand Oaks that evening on the 8th. And the crazy part about this whole thing is my wife texts me during all this chaos and says, by the way, we're getting evacuated. And all I could think of is, and the hits just keep on coming, you know? So as the fire is pushing into Thousand Oaks that night, we were sent to Hillcrest right up the street here. And the fire pushed across Hillcrest and was burning towards the middle of town. And we go into the neighborhood, and the whole neighborhood was on fire, and we come to a house, and there's fire everywhere around the house. And there's a guy standing there frozen with fear. He didn't know where to go or what to do. And it was smoky. You couldn't see the house across the street from you. It was so smoky. And we got him out of there. We put him in his car, and he drove off through the smoke, and we never saw him again. But the next morning, when the sun came up, his house was still there. So for firefighters on big fires, it's like Groundhog's Day. I think we were up for 3 days straight to start that thing. From borderline to the fires, you just go. You just go. And you eat when you can, and you sleep when you can, and you fight fire the rest of the time. So, like I said, it's Groundhog's Day. So day 7, 8, 9 comes around, 7, 8, 9, 10, I couldn't even tell you. And I finally saw my wife and kids again, and I gave them a hug and a kiss. And that's the story of firefighters on Truck 35.